once recited to inspire hope in the hearts of our children, has now been weaponized into a dagger that now inspires only fear. Such is written on the wall of Arthur Lennon.
Arthur Lennon is a star whose light has been eclipsed by the shadow of his own pinnacle. Today marks the beginning of the end for Lennon and the ideals he publicly preached for nearly a decade. Until next time, this is John Edwards from CNN.
Incarceration is survival of the fittest, but not for men like Arthur Lennon. No, for them it is child's play. Incarceration to them is like speeding tickets to drivers at the Daytona 500.
Milton, being the soothsayer that he was, predicted Armageddon in 2 words: paradise lost. If only he were here today to see life imitate his art.
He'll be left with no choice but to feed on breadcrumbs when all hope is lost for him. It's up to you to keep it that way.
Mr. Lennon, to what extent do you dabble in real estate?
As much as one can to justify it as dabbling.
You can always ask me to rephrase the question if it's not rhetorical enough for your standards, Mr. Lennon. Although I can't always say I will comply. In the last 6 months or so, has there been an international conglomerate that has piqued your interest?
The only conglomerate that comes to mind by the name of Societe Generale Immobiliare, with whom I had dealings that were ultimately short-lived.
It's quite the misnomer you've tailored for short-lived. Low-hanging fruit that, at first, seems ripe for the taking. But the more you look, the more it couldn't be further from the truth.
If I were to be mentioned in the same sentence as Immobiliare, it would be in the capacity of a homeowner than an investor.
To further prove my point, if you don't mind, Mr. Lennon, although there's not much you can do to trump it, I would like to call Richard Amberson to the witness stand, Mr. Chairman.
Objection, badgering the witness.
Sustained. The prosecution will refrain from making argumentative remarks.
My sincerest apologies, Mr. Chairman. Could you please state your name and occupation for the records?
My name is Richard Amberson, and my occupation is a businessman.
What is your relationship with Mr. Lennon, which could be considered a thing of the past?
I first met Mr. Lennon at a gala in Paris where I was introduced to him by an intermediary of the Vatican to whom I previously, albeit briefly, met.
What was your first impressions of him?
He struck me as someone who warranted hair by the back of your head.
And what was it about his behavior or the words that came out of his mouth that led you to such a conclusion?
Well, in actuality, it was a dubious amount of currency that was transferred overnight to one of the SGI accounts. And that's without considering the number of times the currency was caught in the rat traps that were set in place to validate its legitimacy and origin.
Through which channels did this currency acquire, to be exact?
Money laundering and bookmaking were the two that were caught to my attention.
The prosecution has submitted for the committee a full suspicious activity report prepared by Mr. Amberson and his team.
Defense, you may proceed with your cross-examination if you wish.
Mr. Amberson, Just as my client, Mr. Lennon, struck you as someone to be wary of, you, sir, strike me as someone who understands how rats have a tendency to fall into traps more than compliance reports.
I suppose I've taken up studying the parallels between rats and felons.
As one does when managing a conglomerate the breadth of Immobiliare. But I want to take your analogy of rats as gospel. If a rat were given the 9 lives from the cat that's chasing it, it would use 8 of those lives to avoid the traps that were set for him. But it would use 1 life to run for its life from the cat. Objection, Rothers. In a matter of minutes, I will shed light, Mr. Chairman, if you would allow me to do so.
Proceed, but make haste.
A trap without bait is, and in this case, is the unregulated cash flow, is, for lack of a better term, useless. Mr. Lennon, seduced by the Bates whiff, indulged to a point where he was found guilty for suspicious activity reports and know your customer reports. But he was acquitted on anti-money laundering compliance, currency monitoring reports, and transaction monitoring reports. But on a more microscopic level, the criteria used to scrutinize Mr. Lennon's investments, which are the 2 aforementioned compliance checks, are in no way, are by no means adequate to scrutinize the illegitimacy, which was outlined in the dossier and submitted to the committee.
Inadequate as they may seem, the criteria held in contempt was set in place for the good, not bent to their client's will. Which brings me to my next and final set of points. I'll have you know that the compliance checks that you so brutally rendered worthless just now are the very same compliance checks that your client had no part in forging. Which is why you allowed them to have their day in court over the documents that your client so easily altered, being the master manipulator that he is behind closed doors, of course. The defense's silence speaks for itself, Mr. Chairman, but if by some fluke it fails to resonate, the prosecution has submitted a timeline with the security breaches suffered at the hands of the defense in their pursuit of the aforementioned reports. And with that, I rest my case.
The committee will adjourn for an hour of recess.
Just as you don't teach your mother how to scold, the same way you don't teach your father how to fuck. Allison.
I learned how to do both from you, in service of others. And today, when the opportunity arose, I returned the favor, much to your apparent chagrin.
He was found guilty, but acquitted.